Okay. So last time, ya Shabab, I started introducing the introduction about thermodynamics and few basic definitions and concepts. Okay. Who can remind me what is thermodynamic is? What is the study of thermodynamics? يلا يا let's see. Go ahead, Omar.
It's the study of transfer of energy and heat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Best transfer of energy. There are two main
And
parts.
heat and heat and heat.
طب heat is energy. في another type of heat.
اللي هو الورك.
Heat and work.
Okay. So
Yeah.
this is the first part of the science. What is the second part?
Energy and heat and work.
قلنا is the study of energy transfer by heat and work. Okay. And what else?
Properties
صوتك واضح يا إبراهيم.
and its effect on property.
Effect of the energy transfer on إيش؟
On the property.
On the properties of the substance or the matter. Okay. يعني it's not only the study of energy transfer but also the effect of this energy transfer on the properties of the substance or matter or material itself. Okay, so this is very important. So this is what is the thermodynamics is about, and I gave an example. We said if we have a coffee, I'm interested to study the coffee, for example. How does the heat transfer from the hot coffee, let's say, to the surrounding? So and then I introduce basic definitions of what's the system. We said the system is whatever we're interested in. We said the surrounding is whatever outside the system or away from the system, far away. And we said the boundary is what separates the system from its surrounding. Okay? And then we said we have two types of systems. We said we have what we call a closed system, where the mass within the system boundary is fixed or does not change, or the mass of the system does not cross the boundary, and this is important, ya shabab. And open system is where a mass can cross the system boundary. So this is the main difference between let's say a closed system and open system. Can energy transfer, let's say, can energy cross the boundary in a closed system? That's fine, yes. Energy can cross the boundary in a closed system, but the mass does not cross the boundary. So this is the main difference between a closed system and open system. أي سؤال على هذا يا شباب؟ What's a system? What's a boundary? What is a surrounding? What is a closed system and what is an open system? An open system, we call it also control volume because we usually control, or we're interested to study a certain space or volume where the matter is changing inside, or the mass is changing inside. That's why we call it control volume. أي سؤال يا شباب? Any question?
دكتور
Yes.
كنترول يعني فيكست يعني ثابت.
تقدر تقول yes.
Okay.
Control is I'm controlling a certain I'm controlling either, let's say, in the closed system, I'm controlling the mass. So it's like I'm fixing the mass, and on control volume, I'm controlling or fixing the volume or the space. So in other words, you can say control means fixed, yes. أي سؤال ثاني? Any other question? Don't feel shy. If you don't understand something, it's fine, you can ask. This is important, ya shabab. So these are the basics. If you don't understand the basics, you might struggle later. So these basics needs to be clear. Okay. And then we talked also about the different types of boundaries. So we said here, in our case here, for the hot coffee and the water flowing in a pump, let's say here, we said the boundary is fixed. That means the dimensions of the system that I'm interested in to study is not changing. However, in other types of systems, I could have a moving boundary. An example is this system which we call piston cylinder arrangement. Okay, so a piston is this disc that is dashed here, and then the cylinder is like a cylinder. You know, all of you know what a cylinder is. It's hollow inside, and then I can, let's say, enclose a certain mass, maybe liquid, maybe gas, maybe whatever, and then I apply work, and then change, let's say, the pressure. I change the volume of this fluid. Okay, so if I start with initial condition and then I have a final condition, let's say a smaller volume. In this case, let's say if I'm interested in to study the water vapor, let's say here in this example I have water vapor inside the cylinder, and I'm trying to compress this water vapor. So in this case, if you notice, I start with a certain volume of the boundary or the space, and the final condition is a smaller, let's say, volume. In this case, since I'm compressing, you see now the boundary is not fixed. The boundary is not fixed and it is changing inside. This is what we call a moving boundary. Okay, because the system I'm interested in is changing in volume, is not fixed. Okay, in this case I have a moving boundary. In the previous examples here we have a fixed boundary. All right, so these are the two also main difference, or the two different types of a boundary. So we have a fixed boundary and we have a moving boundary. أي سؤال على الباوندري؟ أي سؤال؟ Any question about the system boundary?
ايه يا دكتور، عندي سؤال عن السيستم باوندري.
اتفضل.
في الكلوز سيستم نفسه الباوندري يكون مغلق على في جميع الاتجاهات، صحيح؟
شوف، هو في كل الحالات، حتى في الموفينج باوندري يكون انت كانك ايش تسوي؟ كانك تحط دائره على السيستم اللي انت انترستد ان. يعني زي هنا مثلا انا interested in study whatever inside the cup. خلاص احط الباوندري لاين حقي على الكاب، معناته اي شيء داخل الكاب this is my system اللي انا
مو بشرط يكون مغطى، عادي يكون انا اتخيله بس انه مغطى.
لا هو مو شيء انه مثلا مغلق او مفتوح، ممكن يكون open، ممكن يكون زي مثلا الكاب هنا حق الكافي is open to environment.
يس
صح؟ في البامب هنا لا، يكون مقفل. everything. So it doesn't matter, it's not necessarily closed ولا open أو مغلق يعني أو مفتوح. هو الفكرة إنه الباوندري بيغطي على الشيء اللي أنت مهتم في دراسته فقط.
بس خلاص.
Good, very good. أي سؤال ثاني؟ أي سؤال ثاني؟ بعدين يا شباب تكلمت على اختيار السيستم باوندري، يعني how do you select your boundary. And I give same example here in this piston cylinder system. We said that let's say I'm interested to study how the piston weight affects الفوليوم حق الووتر vapor. فمعناته والله أنا مهتم بتأثير الويت حق البستن. فمنطقيا okay, my boundary will enclose the whole piston, the vapor, the cylinder and the piston. Okay, so I select my boundary so that it serves my objective. فاختيار السيستم boundary يا شباب is very important, and it depends, as I said, on the objective of the study. Okay, also it depends on the other important thing is the information given. يعني given information. What information is given? خلينا نقول يعني الويت مثلا ما هو معطى. اوكي، ممكن اذا الويت ما هو معطى وانت مهتم بتغير مثلا الفوليوم حق الووتر فيبر, maybe I will not include the piston. in the boundary. Why? Because this information is not given. Why should I include it, and in my equations later the weight will show up and then I don't have the information for that. Okay, so selection of the boundary depends again on the objective of your study and depends on what given information, especially especially at the system boundary that you are selecting. Okay, فلو عندي system معين I'm interested to study, usually I will select my boundary where I have the most conditions given, the most information given for that system. Okay, so this is very important يا شباب. أي سؤال على هذه النقطة إنه how do we select a system boundary؟ عاد اعذرونا على الخط شوي مضروب لأنه ما عندي الباد يعني، بس إن شاء الله by next class I will have the nice handwriting. أي سؤال؟
لا I think it's clear.
Everyone else?
Clear, Doctor.
Okay. سهل الموضوع صح؟
Yes.
Yes.
طيب then يا شباب we talked about what's the definition of a property and what's a state and what's a process, and we said the property is a characteristic of the system يعني it describes the system. We call it macroscopic or average or overall characteristic of a system زي الماss, temperature, volume, and these properties describe the system at any given time. Okay, يعني خلينا نقول السيستم is sitting زي ما قلنا قهوة حارة باردة ممكن والله وسط فيها سكر ما فيها سكر whatever the state, whatever the condition of the liquid or the system, it's always described by these characteristic, and this is what I call a property. Okay, so it doesn't depend on a process. Whether the system is going through a process or not, it doesn't matter. It's always described by these macroscopic characteristics. Okay, and this gives us also a definition of a state. So when I say this system is at initial state or final state or state 1 going to state 2, etc., a state is basically a condition of the system with the properties at that given time. Okay, so a state is the condition of the system, or the how is the behavior of the system is described by what? By these properties at that given time. فلما أقول لك عندي this system here, piston cylinder, it was volume, the volume 1 is 100 meter cube and the final volume is 20 meter cubed after compression here. Okay, after compressing the piston, the volume decreased from 100 meter cube to a final of 20 meter cube. وش معناته؟ معناته my initial state, the volume at the initial state was 100 meter cube, and the volume at the final state, which is the final condition, or the volume describing the condition of the final state, is 20 meter cube. Okay, so this is what a state is. So it describes the system condition at a given time. And then we say the process is simply transformation from one state to the other state. Okay, so when I say the system is going through a process, it means it's going from one state to the other state. Okay, and then I talked about two types of state. We said we have a steady state process and we have unsteady state process. Sometimes also we call it transient process. Okay, so the steady state, usually these properties, if you try to measure the properties during a steady state process, you will notice that the properties are not changing with time, but the opposite is true. So for unsteady state process, usually the properties are changing with time. Okay, so keep this in your mind. We have steady state, properties are not changing with time during this process. For unsteady state process, you have properties changing with time. أي سؤال يا شباب على هذا الموضوع؟ أي سؤال على هذا الموضوع؟ Any questions so far? Right, this is يا شباب what I talked about in the previous lecture. Okay. Today, let's since we're talking about changing states or steady state process and unsteady state process, and also we're talking about states. Let's describe what we call equilibrium state. So let's write it down. So this is equilibrium state. So what is equilibrium state? ها شباب، من اللي عنده فكرة عن الاكوليبريم ستيت؟ إبراهيم.
When one of the properties outside on the surrounding equal the properties of the system.
That was not bad guess, but not exactly. Not exactly. Muhammad.
When the temperature of all the elements in the system is equal.
Okay, you are partly correct. لما temperature equal, what do you mean?
When they are the same, when they have the same temperature in the system.
So the system temperature is not changing, قصدك مثلا.
Yes, there is no energy moving from one object to another.
ممتاز. So this is what we call إيش شباب? This is what we call thermal equilibrium. Okay, that's good, but so you are getting close. Omar?
If all the properties, the temperature and mass and everything, doesn't change during the process, we call this equilibrium state.
Excellent. Okay, so this is more of close to the correct answer. So when we talk about everything, not only the thermal, we have other things that also needs to be in equilibrium or not changing. What are they, ya shabab? Just a quick reminder, if you remember in the physics, if you have, let's say, a box like this, and then you apply forces, if we have two equal forces applying here, this is F1 and this is F2, okay? So what do we call this? If this F1 equals to F2, we call this mechanical equilibrium, صح? If these forces are equal, we call this mechanical equilibrium. Equilibrium state in thermodynamics, ya shabab, is not only about mechanical equilibrium. You have to have a mechanical equilibrium in the system also. The system has to be in mechanical equilibrium, but not only mechanical equilibrium. That's the point. So everything else has to be in equilibrium. What is everything else? So that's the question. So one of you said temperature or thermal equilibrium. Also, the temperature of the system, okay, should also be not changing, should also be in equilibrium. What else, ya shabab? What do you guess? What else?
Volume. Chemical equilibrium.
Excellent. Chemical equilibrium. مش معناته chemical equilibrium?
That there is no reactions happening, I think.
ممتاز. معناته let's say my خلاص my composition مثلا إذا عندي مثلا water H2O خلاص it's H2O is not changing. Okay, maybe the number of moles N. Okay, number of moles of the number of molecules are also fixed, not changing. This is what we call chemical equilibrium. What else يا شباب?
I think the phase.
Very good, very good. Also the phase. Phase. ذكرتم قبل ولا شو الوضع؟
أنا مذاكر قبل صراحة.
قبل. Phase equilibrium. Okay. So phase equilibrium is, what is the phase? معناته ايش؟ معناته it's either all مثلا liquid or gas or maybe solid. Okay, so the phases are not changing. You might have multiple phases, that's also fine, but it should not change. خلاص, it stays the same. So let's say part of it stays liquid and part of it stays gas. خلاص, it's the all parts are in their phase equilibrium and are not changing. Okay, so if you have all these conditions applied, okay, this is what we call equilibrium state. And one important thing, ya shabab, in thermodynamics, and you should pay attention to this and keep this in your mind, each state in thermodynamics, when I give you a problem, I tell you this system goes from the state 1 to state 2, every time or mostly the assumption is احنا دائما نفترض في thermodynamics انه whatever state the system is, we assume it is in equilibrium state. Okay, فلما اقول لك في سؤال انه والله initial state is at this until the final state is this, خلاص, you are assuming, or I am assuming, that this initial state and this final state are equilibrium states. So I don't need to mention to you انه equilibrium, لكن in your mind you should know that they are in equilibrium state. Okay, معناته everything is fixed, the mechanically, thermally, chemically, and phase wise. Okay, so واضحة يا شباب what is equilibrium state? Is it clear يا شباب؟
Yes.
في أحد عنده سؤال؟ شباب, please, if you have a question, ask. يعني I don't need to يعني ما بحلف عليكم يعني. Yeah, go ahead.
دكتور, فلنفرض ان عندنا اللي هو عملية غليان ماء.
تمام.
و there is a vapor and liquid. This is a equilibrium state also, because it's constant.
Let's think about it.
Yeah.
Is it in thermal equilibrium مثلا? Let's
Yes.
look.
100 Celsius.
Okay, so the temperature is not changing. Is it chemically the same? خلينا نقول it is the same
H2O.
the same composition. طيب phase wise,
there is a vapor and there is a liquid.
but is it in equilibrium? That's the question.
Yeah, I think it's in equilibrium because it's changing but constantly.
لا, بس انت فكر فيها. Is the liquid, انت قلت الحين قاعد تغلي, معناته عندي liquid و gas. Is the liquid staying the same and the gas staying the same, ولا they are changing?
They are changing. Yeah.
معناته it's not in equilibrium. معناته no. So the process itself, يعني during the boiling itself, this is not equilibrium. Yeah. However, if yes. I tell you that I am boiling water until, let's say, a certain volume of liquid and gas, and tell you this is the final state. معناته I reach a certain volume of liquid and gas, then I stopped. I stopped adding more energy to break the bonds of the liquid to make it vapor. معناته I stopped the energy, so there is no energy transfer anymore. I fixed the state, so there is no phase change. خلاص, liquid بقى liquid والgas راح gas. I stopped the process. Then this is, I can call equilibrium state.
Yeah.
Very good question. فهمت الفرق؟ يعني this is what we assume in thermodynamics. So in thermodynamics, when I tell you the final state is this, even if it was going through a phase change, but the final state I can assume it's equilibrium if the liquid and gas volume in this case does not change.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah. Any other question? Any other question? The other way, ya shabab, to look into the equilibrium state is if you look at the properties, yani if you observe the properties, these properties, you can imagine that you can isolate it. If you isolate the system from its surrounding and look at the system itself, you will see that all properties are not changing. So this is another way to look at the equilibrium state. Okay? This is just another quick note about this. Questions? Questions? طيب, let's look at now the different types of properties, ya shabab. And also please pay attention to this one. It's very important because this is what we care about thermodynamics here, the properties. Properties or property, okay? There are two main types of property. Okay, the first one I call extensive properties, and the other type is what I call intensive الله يعين على هذا الخط. Intensive properties. Okay. طيب. What is extensive properties? What is intensive properties? To explain you what is extensive property, ya shabab, let me give you an example here. Imagine, ya shabab, I have a car. Okay. And I would like to divide this car into, let's say, 4 different parts. This is part 1. So let's call this part 1. This part 2. This part 3. And this part 4. Okay? So I divided my car into 4 different parts. Hello? The question is, what is the mass of the car? What is the mass of the car? Okay, mass of the car in terms of the mass of these parts, ya shabab. So what can I write an equation for it? What's the equation?
M1 plus M2 plus M3 M4.
Simply, صح? يعني in simple term, I can say is basically M1 plus M2 plus M3 plus M4. Okay? هذه يا شباب, if the property basically can be added up, so if you divide your system into subsystems or subparts, if you can add up the property of these parts, okay, to sum it to the total of the system, this is what I call extensive property. So basically the mass is extensive property. Who can give me another example of a property that is extensive?
Volume.
Volume, مظبوط. يعني لو جمعت الvolume of each part of a system, it can give me the volume of the total of the system. So we have, احنا في البداية قلنا mass, then volume. What else? Huh?
I think energy because it's adding up all points now.
That's
You
correct.
can add.
Yes, energy can also be added. So I can add, let's say, thermal energy at part 1 of 10 joule, part 2 I have 20 joule, part 3 30 joule, then I can sum it up to the total energy. So energy, yes, it is an extensive property. Excellent. وش بعد?
area.
Area, that's also correct.
temperature.
size.
وقف مين اللي قال temperature؟
أنا
طيب
عادي
تخيل
دكتور.
تخيل الشمس في الرياض صقعت ولا عندك ولا في الشرقية صقعت السيارة، صارت السيارة كلها under some temperature. Can I add the temperature from different parts?
لا يا دكتور.
معناته ايش؟ معناته temperature is actually an intensive property. Okay, so this is very good since someone brought it up. So temperature is intensive property. معناته ايش يا شباب؟ معناته ايش الفرق بين الانتنسيف والاكستنسيف؟ الانتنسيف property is independent of the ايش؟
size.
Independent of the mass. It does not depend on the mass of the system. Okay, so the extensive is independent of the mass. يعني لما تقسم السيستم عندك إلى multiple masses and then you take the property of each mass of this, if you sum it up, if the property can be summed up, this is extensive. If it does not depend on the different masses of the system, then this is what we call intensive. What else intensive? من يعطيني مثلا other example for intensive?
Time.
Time.
There is no
is-
time zones.
Time is not, it doesn't describe the system. I mean, no, yes, time is not a property.
Yeah.
Time is a dimension or يعني.
Can we say concentration?
Concentration. طيب, think about it. What is concentration? It depends. What type of concentration you're talking about. If you're talking about number of moles, this is ايش؟ extensive or intensive؟ خلينا نقول number of moles. ايش رايك؟
Extensive.
I guess intensive.
ليش؟ تخيل السيارة هنا عبارة عن مثلا molecules. Can I add the molecules or not? For each part. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. يعني تخيل انه سيارة مثلا انه volume عندي gas مثلا. If I separate it at different volumes, each volume has a certain number of molecules. So actually number of moles here, N, is basically, so N here is basically extensive property. عندك برضو الفورس صح؟ الفورس it's also extensive. يعني لما مثلا اجي والله قاعد اتضارب انا وياك يعني ما this is just an example don't take it seriously. لما مثلا والله نضارب وشوي جاء واحد يفزع معي، لما كل واحد منا يعطيك بوكس it will be added يعني صح ولا لا؟ So this is also extensive property, the force. طيب, let's go back to intensive. We said temperature. What else? Who can give us another example?
pressure.
Pressure, صح? So pressure is another example for intensive property. So if the system is under certain pressure, okay, and if the, let's say خلينا نقول احنا under the atmospheric pressure. Okay, so it does not depend if يعني خلينا نقول جسمي مثلا my hands is under the same pressure as my neck مثلا ولا my head, so it's independent of the mass. Okay, what else?
Density.
ممتاز. So density, انتم عارفين يا شباب density is important property صح؟ وانتم عارفين مثلا المويه at normal temperature has 1000 for example kilogram per meter cube density. وش معناته؟ معناته this density does not change. لو المويه فيك عندك 10 كيلو مويه ولا 1 كيلو مويه, if it's under the same temperature it has the same density. So it is independent of the mass. فهمتم الحين وش الانتنسيف؟ يعني is it clear what's intensive?
Yes, I think clear.
Yeah, density طبعا الunit as we said is kilogram per meter cube. طبعا in thermodynamic يا شباب the reciprocal of this, which is the meter cubed per kilogram, do you know what we call it? Meter cube per kilogram is what I call a specific volume. Specific volume. Okay, this is what I call a specific volume. So specific volume, if you notice, كأني أقول يعني خلينا نرجع للدنسيتي. كأني أقول الدنسيتي وش هي؟ الواحد متر كيوب كم في كيلوغرام of this substance or this matter. فلما أقول لك والله water ولا كافي ولا خلينا نقول لبن ولا حليب, لما نقول كم الكثافة حقته what's the density, كأني أقول كم المتر كيوب كم الماس حقه, يعني what is the weight of 1 meter cube of that substance. عشان كذا أنا أقول لكم it doesn't depend on the mass. On the same thing here, the specific volume is just the opposite. 1 kilogram of this substance, what is the volume of it? This is what I call specific volume. Okay, so this is the volume of 1 kilogram or per unit, so meter cube per unit mass. Okay, is it clear now يا شباب the types of properties? Type of properties.
Yes.
But let me ask you a question. What do you think it's easier to work with, intensive or extensive? And why? يعني لما تجاوبني أبغاك تقول لي ليش.
Extensive because we can control it.
Extensive because we can control it. طيب. Any other one?
Intensive دكتور.
intensive.
طيب اللي يقول intensive ليش؟
Because we can take maybe like a small sample and then we can generalize it.
Very good. You agree يا شباب؟ في أحد doesn't agree?
Yes, I agree.
Yes, I agree.
Exactly. So intensive properties, since it is independent of the mass, it can be generalized to the whole system. You don't have to worry about each part of the system. Okay. However, if you work with extensive, you might need to be careful. You need to include everything. You might need to include every part. You don't want to miss any small part. Like in intensive, as your friend mentioned, you can take maybe a sample or part of the system and you can generalize it to the whole part of the system. So that's why, Shabab, inshallah, usually what we work with, Shabab, in our thermodynamic examples and problems, we mostly work with intensive properties. We work with intensive properties. The other point is, Shabab, I would like to point out is that usually whatever extensive property, I can change it to intensive property. كيف؟ أحد يقدر يقول لي كيف؟
Can you repeat that question, Doctor?
The question is, can I can change my extensive property into intensive property? How can I do that?
I think you take take the mass and the volume, for example, and divide them by each other. So you get the density. That's when you have an intensive property.
معناته إيش؟ معناته I can select, and this is the important point, I can select certain property that I normalize this property by another property. إيش يعني normalize؟ يعني I divide. So I can take any property and divide it by certain property that will generalize my property, and that will make it intensive property. فهمتم الريليشنشيب between extensive and intensive؟ الدنسيتي عبارة عن ايش؟ الماس أنا extensive هنا ايش في ذا؟ الماس هنا يا شباب قبل شوي قلنا انه extensive. طيب الفوليوم قلنا انه extensive، لكن once you divide mass by volume it becomes what? It becomes intensive. The same thing, the opposite is true. When I divide the volume by the mass, I get the specific volume. I can divide the energy is extensive. I can divide it also by, let's say, the mass. I get specific energy. Then this energy does not depend on the mass. And so on يا شباب. البريشر عبارة عن ايش؟
Pressure force over area.
Force over area. طيب الفورس عبارة عن ايش؟ Extensive property. والarea is extensive property. However, if we divide the force by the area, I normalize it and I make my property intensive. So it will not depend on the area anymore. Okay. Is it clear now, ya shabab? Is this clear? So this is another important point to mention. So as a summary, what we discussed so far is we talked about what is equilibrium state. We talked about the different types of properties. We said we have extensive properties, which depends on the mass of the system. And then we have intensive property that is independent of the mass of the system. Okay. Any questions, ya shabab, here? Any questions? Any questions? All right, so it seems like I won't have enough time to go through what I wanted to talk about. It's already 47. But inshallah, بإذن الله, next class we should finalize this chapter اللي هو introduction chapter, and then the class after that بإذن الله تعالى we will move on to the property evaluation. How do we evaluate properties at different states, different conditions of the system? Yes, question?
Well, we should study from slides.
قلت لكم أنا ما عندي slides, لكن you can study from my note or from the book, يعني the textbook. I will, by the way, I forgot to do that. I will upload maybe chapter 1 so that you can start studying. Yeah.
Video.
Yes. أيوة.
Video you will upload.
Not yet. I will upload it, inshallah. I will try to do it today. Like, I already uploaded the syllabus, the final version. We uploaded also the property table اللي we will be using, ya shabab, from now on for the next chapter, يعني اللي هو evaluating properties. And please open the property table, get familiar just with the table, the terminologies, and then I will explain it in the future, inshallah, in the near future. Okay. أي سؤال ثاني؟ Okay, and then I also will send you, ya shabab, maybe a simple practice problem for the units, because units are very, very important. واقول لكم على يعني على بلاطه، اغلب الطلاب في الثيرموداينامكس يغلطون في اليونتس، في اليونت conversion. Maybe let's say pressure units, usually we use, let's say, maybe Pascal. So you need to convert from bar or atmospheric to Pascal, for example. So they make mistake and then the whole question can be wrong. Okay, so pay attention to the units conversion. So I will send you a problem and then you can maybe solve it, and next class we can discuss it. Okay, واضح يا شباب؟ Okay. Yeah, that's it. If you don't have any question, you are free to go. But just before you go, just 1 second. Let me just check. Okay, خلاص. يلا شباب. Good luck.
يعطيك العافية يا دكتور، في أمان الله.
الله يعافيك. موفقين.